Hello and welcome to the Roundup inside Guthrie City Hall here in beautiful downtown Guthrie. I'm your host, Chris Evans, as we visit with our local legislators here in Logan County, including Representative Garry Mize, District 31, Representative John Pfeiffer, District 38, and from Senate District 20, Senator Chuck Hall. You guys ready to kick off the second session of the 57th Legislature?
We better be.
Ready or not, here it comes. It will begin February 3rd. It'll begin with the State of the State with Governor Kevin Stitt, and then we kick off from there. So we've had several interviews together. Why run for a representative and why run for a senator? And a rep is 2 years, but the constituents are a little bit closer. Senators is 4 years, but your territory is a little bit large. So what made you go representative senator?
I'm gonna give my honest answer here. At the time, the representative seat was coming open, so that was the only option. Senator A.J. Griffin was going to come back for re-election. So in the middle of the campaign, actually, I found out that she was not going to come back and that seat was going to open. Actually had some conversation about that, but as soon as I heard the name of the gentleman that was running, I thought, they're in good hands, so I'm going to bow out. But yeah, that was the main reason. But specifically, it was the biggest part or biggest city in the district is Guthrie, which is my hometown, and so it made sense. And I like to be close to the people. The Senate, there's a little disconnect. But.
Well, for me, it was, thank you for that.
Little segue.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I appreciate that. So for me, really, it wasn't that hard of a decision. As a former mayor of Perry, spent a lot of time in municipal government. I, of course, knew our state representative at the time and our state senator very well. Developed a good relationship with them. I had been in business in northern part of the district, in Pawnee County and Noble County, and to some degree Kingfisher County. So I knew a lot of people, and so it was kind of an easy decision for me. Sometimes I get a little jealous of these guys, though, because we're talking about a difference between maybe a maximum of 40,000 constituents versus the 80,000 that I serve. And it takes a lot of time to go from one side of the district to the other, and it's not just one or two communities or three or four. I have 15 or 20 that are all pulling for my attention, and I try to give it to them the best I can. So, but it's a commitment. It takes a commitment. I had some good friends, made some good relationships. Garry was wonderful, and I've known John for a long time. So I think everybody's well covered.
For me, the last time we redistricted, when the northern part of Logan County got redistricted into House District 38, Representative Dale DeWitt, who term limited out and I replaced him, tried to make a very rural district with a lot of farms, a lot of agriculture. I cover 5 counties, but only get 10 stoplights. One of the few districts where cows and still outnumber people. And Dale's a former ag teacher and farmer and rancher and knew how important agriculture was to that part of the district. So when he was terming out, I thought somebody who understood agriculture, had an agriculture background, kind of needed to hold that seat. And so that's why I decided to run. And kind of like Garry said, when I started running, Senator Griffin was still there as our senator, and then just decided to stay in the House. We've had a lot of turnover in the House with term limits and a couple really tough years. A lot of people didn't want to run again because apparently the salary you get for this job wasn't worth all the headaches, which I get sometimes. We've needed some stability, and so that's why I chose to stay in the House. This is my 6th year, but unfortunately I'm a pretty senior member in comparison to a lot of them, and just try to make it is. And we like to say, the House is closer to the people, because we have to run for a re-election every 2 years. I can't speak for all senators. I know that's not the case here. Our senators, or my senator, always gets back with me very promptly, like everybody else. And it's nice to have a good working relationship. I know that's not always the case between House districts and Senate districts, and especially at the leadership level, it gets played up, especially around budget time. All the House wants to do this and the Senate wants to do this, and it's funny because behind closed doors, everybody works together really well. And sometimes we have differences of opinion, and in a democracy, we have to settle them in the press sometimes to try to get our side out. But by and large, for the time I've been in, this has been last year and hopefully going into this year, the closest relationship between the House and the Senate that we've had. And you bring in a governor who's willing to work with everybody, it's made for a really good working environment.
And the bills are officially in as of this week that we're filming here. And I think a little over 1,300 in the House, which was about 400 less than last year. But when you start doing with all the House and Senate, it all comes down to the budget. And it sounds like a little bit of an increase, possibly. I don't know if that's finalized yet, or.
Well, so there won't, so you're talking about from what's certified dollars?
Mm-hmm.
So we won't have the final certification for another few weeks.
Okay.
But it looks like the preliminary numbers are going to be reasonably flat. You know, last year we were dealing with a budget surplus of about a little over $600 million. This year we've seen economic growth in the state of Oklahoma of just about 1%. So we're talking about $9 to $10 million in economic growth. So by and large, that's pretty much a flat budget. We'll see what the certification comes out to be, but we're going to be dealing with a pretty flat budget.
It's amazing. I think we talked about this a few times. When you get your budget, a lot of the money is already appropriate. I mean, you guys work with very little of what everyone would think that you guys divvy up, but it's already spent for the most part, or a portion, I should say.
Right. I think it's roughly about 70% of all the tax dollars collected now is automatic off the top, direct apportionments. And so we only appropriate about 30%, give or take. And that's caused some problems in really down budget years when you have so much automatic stuff happening. It makes it tough to do what we're elected to do, which is make tough decisions and try to figure out where money goes in down times. I think with the initial numbers, it does look like the revenue collections are softening a little bit. That's mainly due, Oklahoma's still an oil and gas state. I think we're down to 48 active rigs. You got some oil and gas companies based out of Oklahoma that are struggling a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that goes, and like the senator said, what the final number looks like in February. But I do think if nothing else, the initial numbers kind of look like a flat budget. And as far as House bills and stuff filed, I had to write it on my hand, but I got the numbers on the way in. There was 1,361 House bills filed, 16 joint resolutions, and 4 House concurrent resolutions. So down a little bit, but still an awful lot of legislation to sort through and get through.
Absolutely. And we talked about a lot of the money last year was the teacher deal. And kind of get into education here to begin some of our topics looking forward. And you guys got a lot of bills that we'll talk about as well that you guys are going to be presenting this year. But what's education look like this year after a pretty heavy season a year ago with teachers?
Well, I think you're going to continue to see a push and the importance of education come to the forefront. I mean, you can't ignore it, and it's over half of the appropriated budget, right? So, and you see the cross section of so many different issues, but education with so many other different issues. So you can't put it to the wayside. But again, with a flat budget year, it just depends on what legislation gets passed, what the final budget meetings look like, and what those requests are, which are coming up here in about a week or so. So we'll see, what that looks like. But it was a big deal what we did last year, or last 2 years. I say last year because that was one I was involved in. But putting that at the forefront, putting money there. But you're going to continue to see talk about getting money into the classrooms and classroom size, that sort of thing, and rightfully so.
And the other thing we hear with public education is the charter schools, and there's a lot of stuff out there that is not in you guys' control, but it ultimately comes to you guys. What's some of the things that we might see this year with charter schools? There's a lot of stuff in the press, a specific charter school, whether they're doing this or that, and that's not your guys' area. It's an OSBI and all that good stuff. But what are we looking at as far as charter schools and as far as legislation that we'll be looking at this year?
So I haven't looked at all of it, but I know just from talks with the folks that I communicate with regularly, my class, but you see the other stuff too. Continued talk about transparency, equity in funding, whether that's traditional public schools or virtual charter. We're talking apples and apples and go students and all the buzzwords. And I think ultimately what is behind that is good-natured. It plays itself out in different ways in each, there's 149 different personalities up there, and issues important to those individuals and those districts. But I think everything is good-natured, and I believe ultimately what they're looking for is efficiency and stewardship of someone else's money, the tax dollar.
And I think we were able to pass a virtual charter school transparency bill last year, and the first reports are going to be coming back once we go back into session. It's going to be interesting to see what those numbers look like. And I know some of the bad thing is it's easy in the world today with social media and everything to kind of get caught up in everything. I like to kind of wait and see what the actual numbers look like, what the facts are before we jump off and go crazy on some things. And so it'll be interesting to see what those numbers actually are after a full year of passing a transparency bill about budgets and virtual charter schools and schools in general, kind of be able to compare and see where we go from here. I think one of the things that wouldn't serve the state very well, and it happens from time to time, is we get caught up in kind of the emotion of things, and it's easy to do, and we start making legislative and state policies based on emotion and not facts. And I'd like to see where the numbers come back and see where we go from there.
Yeah, for me, I think that there's going to be a lot more transparent and open discussion about this. It seems like that the groups, whether you were for or against choice or school choice, they were fractionalized. I mean, you'd have this group talking about it over here and this group talking about it over here, and they never really got together. So I really think there's going to be some real open, transparent discussions about where we go with education. I'm really curious to hear what the governor's State of the State address will come down on related to education. I know there's a lot of talk, a lot of discussion that he has his own ideas of the direction that he'd like to see public education go in the state of Oklahoma, and so I'm kind of waiting with bated breath to kind of see what he rolls out on February 3rd. I think that will set the tone for the direction that the legislature will go.
Can any of you three break down the state report card system and how that works? It's disturbing because
we have enough time for that.
I know, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but it's just so hard to follow. And I try to follow it, and just the acronyms and the formulas, and it's just if you're a parent at home and you see a D and F, you just don't think that your school's getting stuff done in the classroom, which I don't think that's true.
Right. I mean, like you said, it covers lots of different facets, and then there's lots of acronyms that you have to try to follow. The big problem with a lot of things, but specifically the report card and education, again, everybody thinks it's not fair. So rather than leaving a system in place, I think this is my 6th year, and I think every year we've at least tried to tinker with the report card, which then you can't compare results from one year to the other. And it makes it really difficult. I know, as somebody who represents a lot of small schools, dropout rate's a big thing, because if your average class size, you have a senior class of 20, you lose one kid, all of a sudden it skews your results, and then that used to be a big part of the report card. Well, they downplayed that a little bit, and so then the legislature monkeys with the formula a little bit on the report cards, and the State Department of Ed monkeys with the formula, and for people to have any kind of confidence in the system, number one, they've got to make it to where it's easier to understand.
Yes.
And number two, we need to pick a system, whether it's at this point almost even a bad system. In the Marine Corps, they used to talk about an 80% solution. Like rather to have a good or a mediocre plan that you stick with and follow through to the end than a great plan that's too late to do anything about. And we've got to just find a report card system that we like and stick with it for more than 1 year, so we're able to compare how these schools are doing and how they go, and people can have confidence in the report card. I know I talk to a lot of constituents who, all right, we know what this is, we don't know what it means, it changes every year, so we're just not going to pay attention to it. And that's not serving anybody's purpose.
Guthrie Public Schools had the recent report card, and I was like, I have to put this into an article. I don't understand. How am I going to do this? Just watch the video, please.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, we'll move off education real quick, and we'll go to the former mayor and city council member here, Chuck Hall. What about this legislation about cities and counties? I know the Oklahoma Municipal League has some ideas. I know county commissioners are looking for a little bit more road money. What can we look forward to this session with cities and counties?
Yeah, so I really think that there's going to be a lot of issues addressed related to cities and counties. So in fact, Representative Mize and myself, and I think you were here maybe, John, too, when we had the OML here for a sit around to discuss their legislation. Mm-hmm. So from the city side, I think that we're going to be really trying to improve ways to help finance public safety. Specifically rural ambulance service, and what we can do to bring up the quality of health care in rural Oklahoma. I think you're going to see a lot of effort related to broadband service, for rural Oklahoma. Here, with your viewers, it's probably not as important as it is to a lot of my constituents, north of here, where the access is not so great. Moving on to the county, I think you're going to see some reforms in county government. At least that's our hope. And there's two sides to this. One are the reforms that are needed to help county government be a little more educated, a little understanding of the roles that they were elected to do, and the other side deals with finances. We certainly have a lot of improvement that needs to be made for county roads and bridge funding. And so I think you're going to see the legislature say that if we can get some real reforms in county government, where we have confidence in our elected officials that they're going to do the job that they were hired to do, I think that it'll be a lot easier to get the funding that is so needed to better improve these county roads and bridges. And specifically here in Logan County.
Absolutely. Representative Pfeiffer, you're up north with the roads. Representative Mize, you're down in southern Logan County with the roads. So this is something you guys are familiar with.
Monty does a great job.
Absolutely.
He grades all of our roads. Monty, if you're watching, thank you.
And he also has the largest road district.
He does.
He does have
He does. I think, especially when it comes to county government, one of the problems we had is we had a huge scandal that engulfed the whole state back in the 80s. I think all but like 3 county commissioners ended up going to prison. This was a long time ago. To counteract that, the state stepped in and said, all right, if these county officials aren't, if they're going to not do things the way it needs to do, if it winds all of them up in prison, we need to change that. It seems like a lot of times we're always paying for the sins of the past. Yes. This is a different time, definitely a different time in terms of transparency in government, reforms to Open Meetings Act, ways that people can get communications. And so I think it's time to start looking at rolling back some of those regulations that the state imposed. I mean, these people are duly elected by their counties to run them, and we have a process. If people don't like the job they're doing, they will not elect them again. That happens all the time. And so I think it's time to start rolling some of that back. The systems of checks and balances that we put in has become extremely onerous with multiple layers of bureaucracy just to build a county bridge. Your county commissioners have to vote on it, then you have to get ODOT approval, and then you have to do this, and you have to go back and forth, and you end up spending a lot of time and money instead of just fixing the roads. And so I think enough time's passed that definitely a different world than we live in now than in the 80s, and it's time to start looking at rolling some of that stuff back.
Because if Representative Mize fouls out of a basketball game, we should get to play, right?
That's right.
It's his
I'm taking my ball and I'm going home.
That's right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, it's an interesting topic, and there's been a lot of talk about county roads and bridges and funding, and we're talking with several members on both sides, both chambers. We're going to see a lot of legislation there, and I think good legislation. But we, Senator Hall and I spent some time in several meetings in the interim having those discussions. And Logan County is the 3rd fastest growing county in the state. So what's interesting about that is you're seeing pour over from Oklahoma County, so Edmond folks moving north, and the issue is they just live there. they don't do any spending there. They don't buy any gas, groceries, don't do any shopping, so you don't get the benefit of that. But they still want good roads. Well, it doesn't work that way. And so, it's unintended consequences or intended consequences, whatever. And you got the issue, from 30 years ago that Representative Pfeiffer talked about. Is that specific to this time frame? Is that still the case? Are we giving the county commissioners the leeway and freedom to do what they need to do without, creating a situation where they can get in trouble? But we've had good conversations about that and have found what I feel like is potential for some inequity in the way in which they fund based on population and not road miles, and how that can create an issue, especially for two counties butting up against each other, Oklahoma and Logan. You don't have to look at it very hard and very long to see that there's some inequity there, and that's not sustainable. It's not going to work, and you get 1 mile that's paved, and the next mile, east or west isn't, and then one north isn't, but then the one north of that is, and that doesn't make any sense, and nobody wants to drive down that road.
And it's a tough balancing act, even in our own county. The northern part of the county's got more road miles. Southern part of the county's got all the people.
All the people.
It's hard to try to strike that balancing act. I think it is important to remember that up until 10 years ago, the counties didn't receive any money from the state for county roads and bridges. After some shakeups happened, majorities switched over. We started putting money back into county roads and bridges, started the CIRB fund. It took some hits in some down budget years in growth revenue, and so now that things are back on an even keel, we were able to backfill some of that. It got especially bad when the governor vetoed our budget, and Governor Fallon did her line item veto wrong and double dipped out of the money that was supposed to stay at a CIRB. So hopefully last year we've backfilled some of that, and we can continue to grow and move on from there.
So one thing though that I do want to lay out, being a county commissioner is difficult. I mean, it is hard. They've got a difficult job, and it's very hard, almost in some ways harder to please constituents than the job that we're doing. Right. In some ways. But I got to give a shout out to the county commissioners here, in Logan County. All of them, have said, we want you to come in, we want to sit down, we want to tell you about our struggles, we want to tell you, how county government is funded, we want you to understand. And I don't think I would have gotten that, any place else. So the fact that all of them independently have taken their time, to teach me, has been very beneficial. So it allows me to go to the Capitol and understand a little bit about, about the process much better. And they've all done that independently and have done a good job.
And it's been a rough couple of years for county roads. It's bad to say. It's bad for farmers when we have drought years, but it's easier to fix and keep and maintain county gravel and dirt roads when you don't have big rain. And we've had pretty big rainy seasons, especially the last couple of years where we've lost bridges and things like that, and it just takes some time to get those back into shape and put everything back.
You could track legislative phone call rates and rainfall rates.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, you can.
And then all that rain brings in FEMA, which is another layer and a whole other
Yes.
deal. I always brag on Guthrie and Logan County, and I always will, but one of the disadvantages is being butted up against Oklahoma County, the richest county in the state of Oklahoma, the largest county as well. So there's
Well,
a downfall.
strategically placed there for protection and make sure.
Absolutely, appreciate that. Moving on, healthcare. What we look forward here this year in healthcare?
That has the potential to be kind of hairy. We have state questions, so state question 802 and the expansion of Medicaid. Obviously there's going to be a lot of talk about that. There has been a lot of talk about it. There's been a work group that has put in a lot of time and energy and effort into a legislative fix. We've got some proposals that have come out of the governor's office, and so we'll see. But it doesn't just stop there. I mean, I think that we are going to most likely see Medicaid expansion in the state. But you've got several other issues. We're still dealing with prescription costs and surprise billing. We're going to see legislation on those too. And I think it will be good legislation. I think it will continue to make it better. The important part of that will be getting everybody at the table that needs to be a part of that discussion, and figuring out what's good for Oklahoma. You know, and sometimes that proves to be difficult, but it needs to be done.
Yeah, I think we're gonna. I mean, the state question's gonna be what it's gonna be. They gathered seemed like a record number of signatures in a record number of time. Whether there's a legislative solution consensus before that, whether the executive branch decides to move forward through some executive orders, we're just going to kind of have to wait and see. In terms of healthcare in general, I think we're going to see some more bills dealing with scope of practice issues. Yes. For things like, well, CRNAs was a big deal last year. I know the speaker's got a bill that dealing with physician's assistants and what they can and can't do and how much they have to be supervised. For me, that throughout my district becomes a little bit bigger of an issue because unfortunately most of the towns I represent, most of the towns I live in or where I live and stuff, MDs don't want to live there anymore. I mean, it's tough. So how do we reimagine healthcare in the state of Oklahoma, where people still have a place to go, where they can talk to somebody, where they can get the cares they need filled? A year or so ago, we passed some telemedicine legislation through the state of Oklahoma that I think we're going to continue to see roll out and make a big difference for rural Oklahoma, where if they go and see their primary care physician, whether that's a nurse practitioner or PA, and they need a consult for a specialist, they can do that without having to drive all the way to Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And I think, especially for me, and like I live in Mall, Orlando, and a real big advocate for rural Oklahoma, technology is going to be what helps bring and sometimes drag rural Oklahoma up with the rest of the state. It's going to be what allows us to continue to live where we live and do the things we need to do. And I don't think, and it's scary sometimes, but we can't be afraid of change and afraid of technology to help us get to where we need to be. And so I think we're going to continue to see how can we take what technologies we have now, what benefits we have now, and change and allow people to live the way they need to live.
So I'll be the third one in a row to tell you that Medicaid expansion, is going to be an interesting topic, and the state question 802. Couldn't agree more. And I agree with these gentlemen's assessment. At the risk of not being quite as political as they were with you, I have some very serious concerns with 802. Yeah. Anytime that we put something into the Constitution, then you've committed us, to that, regardless of what the federal government might kick down to us. So we know that this is a 9-to-1, match for Medicaid expansion, and we know that the estimated 200,000 lives that we would be bringing on with this is going to cost the state somewhere in the neighborhood, depending on who you talk to, but as high as $140 million. That is just our matching portion of that. My concern is that at some point, the federal government is going to have to really tighten up the purse strings on this deficit that we've got in the country. Yeah. And that they're going to say at some point, we don't need to be sending back to the states all these tax dollars. We got to pay down the deficit. So let's say they cut the benefit to a 50-50 match, right? And now all of a sudden we're looking at $600 or $700 million that the state has to come up with because we've put it in our Constitution. With that said, I fear that maybe the legislature and particularly and possibly the governor have missed their window to come up with a legislative option. These kind of things have to be approved by the federal government. That's taking anywhere between 18 and 36 months to get approval. And we're talking about whether that be some sort of waivers, some sort of block grant program, or a combination of the two. And so if it's 18 to 36 months before we see anything approved, well, the vote will have long happened. More than likely, we're going to get to see the vote in the primary elections. So this thing is going to be settled and on down the road. And I'm not sure the voters are going to accept, particularly those that signed the petition. I'm not sure they're going to accept the legislature just saying, trust me, right, we're going to come up with a better plan. Yeah. you know? And so, I hate that we're here. I mean, I really hate that we're here. I just want to encourage the voters, understand these state questions. And I'm not just talking about just this one. I mean, we're going to have a host of state questions. Understand the questions. Take the time to understand the questions. In fact, your station here, I mean, does a good job of doing a state question review when the time comes. And I really hope that you can, continue to bring that about. Let's get both sides. Let's get the voters educated on what these state questions mean and what it means to us potentially for years on down the line.
Well, and the biggest, issue with that, and the question I think that you should ask before taking on any endeavor change, whether it's public, private, this just makes common sense, but what is the goal? So if you think about that and as it pertains to Medicaid expansion, well, the issue that we're talking about is we're trying to produce better health outcomes. And does the expansion of Medicaid, is there data showing that it improves health outcomes? And I had, I was fortunate, I got to go to DC earlier in the year and sit in 2 or 3 days of Medicaid expansion talks. And that question was presented. And I don't know that I saw the data, to support that. Access to health care and helping from a cost standpoint, that point isn't lost. But is there a goal in mind, and are we accomplishing that? And in this case, it's better health outcomes.
Excellent.
Well, and if our goal is to do better health outcomes, and we do this, and turns out this isn't the way to do it, then we've got to send it back to a vote of the people to change it because it's in the Constitution. Or, heaven forbid, like the senator talked about, the federal government decides how they want to do the match, then we've got to send it back to a vote of the people, and in the meantime, run the risk of seriously damaging the budget of our state and how much we spend on education and roads and all the other stuff we've talked to, because this is in the Constitution and we're mandated to do this. It really scares me when we start. I mean, number one, our Constitution's way too low. It's the 6th largest Constitution in the world already. There's too many things in there. There's things that we can do legislatively that if situations change, then we can go back and address. This bad habit somehow we've gotten into of we want everything in the Constitution is scary. It leaves you really stagnant and hard to change if the situation changes. And especially something as volatile as federal dollars coming in for Medicaid, I think is extremely dangerous to put in the state constitution.
Running short on time, I want to get this in real quick. Criminal justice reform, Kevin Stitt, the governor, just had 1 year anniversary, 774 commutations, 290 pardons, and 101 paroles. I know our Logan County District Attorney, Laura Austin Thomas, was recently in front of the parole board trying to fight against possibly another one. But you guys' thoughts on that one so far? What are you hearing from?
Yeah, so I'm gonna defer to Representative Pfeiffer because
I was looking at you then, so I didn't put him on the spot.
because this will really give us an insight to what a husband and wife talk about at dinner.
Yes.
So go right ahead.
So
You can defer too.
My wife actually works for District Attorney Laura Austin Thomas as an assistant district attorney here in Guthrie. And has very passionate views on criminal justice reform. My own views dovetail in a little bit with her. I worry that just because you say something's not a crime doesn't make it wrong. We've seen in everybody, the frustrating thing about politics is everybody can look at a set of numbers and draw their own conclusions from them, and nobody can agree what they mean. The people who are very strong advocates for criminal justice reform say, look, we've passed all these measures and we've seen a decrease in crime. The people I talk to in my communities and talking to my wife at home, at least the way it feels and the way it seems to them is we've seen an increase in property crimes. When we took the value of to go from a misdemeanor to a felony property crime from $500 to $1,000, we've seen more under $1,000 worth of theft because it's a misdemeanor now.
Right.
Now, finding that balance on where do we go to sustain a prison system that costs the state a significant amount of money, how much money do we focus on treatment, how much do we focus on mental health, it is difficult to find. I worry sometimes we're swinging, we go through these swings where we kind of, all right, we've got too many people in prison, so then we go and we overcompensate and we end up in crime waves where we see a lot of stuff happening. And I don't want to swing too far that way. I do think we need to focus a little more on, and this is something my wife and I agree on, of in prisons right now, we house people. They've committed a crime, they're serving their time, we're housing them there for a set amount of time. There's not a lot of actual rehabilitation, regeneration, recuperation in our prison systems. The career tech system has a program, it's not in every prison, but where they can go and learn skills and stuff. Well, what we need to do, to really get a handle on all this stuff, is to stop the repeat offenders. They need to be able to have a career and be able to get a job when they get out. Actually reworking these people, helping them find a better way in the prison system is what we need to be doing. Because right now, a lot of these people are coming out and they're recommitting crimes, and they get in the system and they're never able to get out of it. And some of that we've adjusted because of the fines and fees that we started addressing last year. Again, we have trouble with state budgets sometimes, so to fund things, we say, you know what, the state can't afford to give you money, but we'll give you the ability to collect fines and fees, which then took district attorneys and turned them into fee collectors that they never wanted to be. Their job was to, convict people of crimes, not become a debt collector for the whole county. And so we've kind of created this system and trying to unwind it where we can give money. First off, we need to start allocating enough money from the state to the district attorney's office so they can run their office on their own without having to rely on fines and fees from people convicted of crimes. And that's going to require another commitment from the state. We started down that track last year, and we can do it. And it helps these people get out from under these mountains of debts they end up getting, and then move on with more conversation. I could go on for hours. This is, the senator is exactly right. This is what we talk about over dinner every day.
And I was aiming it toward you. You're the bad guy and threw him right under the bus.
It's fine.
But just reading between the lines to me, and I can be turned the other way around, but we don't have enough money to build prisons.
Right.
And we're trying to be away from the worst, most incarcerated. So how to get rid of that? Okay, let's just let people out, and then it looks good on paper. Is that? I mean,
Well, so this, going into my first session, I made this public. I didn't have much of my own agenda. I thought it was important to go and learn and see what I was getting into, but be a voice of the people. But criminal justice reform was something that got thrown in my lap, and I kind of got smack in the middle of it. I carried a couple of priority bills, and I made John's wife mad too. So
Join the club.
It's not just him. You have to be willing to look at that because of the amount of money spent, right? So if we are there to vote and appropriate, that's a big piece of it. We call it the Department of Corrections, but I've heard this out of the mouths of insiders. There isn't much corrective about the system. It's important to figure out what are we trying to accomplish, right? What is the goal, and then how do we get there? So it's funding. It's funding of an agency, right? So there's a bit of a conflict of interest there, right? Not pointing fingers, but it's just a system that they have to deal with, but it creates a conflict. Then you have private prisons that are for-profit, that are publicly traded companies. That criminal justice reform flies in the face of their profit model. That's nonsensical, right? And you heard me say this, a week and a half ago, and I can get fired up about it. And I won't do it on your show because I don't want to mess up your show. But that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do that in your home. You wouldn't do that in private business. So why are we doing it with our tax dollars? All with public safety in mind. But are we focusing on the problem at the root and actually trying to address what's going to produce a better outcome? So if we look at mental health and we look at addiction issues, and I had the privilege of touring a prison earlier in the year, talking with a group, about 40 people, and the gentleman that was facilitating that tour asked these individuals, how many would you say the first cousin of your incarceration is addiction? 38 of the 40 stood up. That was a light bulb went off for me. We're talking about this from the wrong perspective. So we have responsibility to them. We have responsibility as stewards of those dollars. are we actually putting those dollars to work to help those individuals? And then a little hand up so that they're tax-paying citizens. They can reintegrate into society. We're putting families back together. You know, if you ask me on a personal level, I'm going to tell you the breakdown of the families can probably be attributed to most problems.
Yeah.
And where we're spending a fair amount of our tax dollars perpetuates that. That's a problem.
Well, and as Gary mentioned, you're also dealing with an agency who wanted more money. So under previous administrations, changes in policy have made a bad problem significantly worse to try to get more funding. Number one, all the people out on ankle monitor bracelets, they continue to count as fully incarcerated people. We need more people because we have this number of prisoners. They pulled all the state prisoners out of county jails, which a lot of county jails across the state were built to house state prisoners and do it. The state would pay them cheaper than housing them themselves, give some income to the county so they could afford to keep up a jail. But no, because DOC at the time wanted more money, they brought all of them in out of county prisons into the state system and said, look, we're so overcrowded, we need more money. We have an overcrowding issue. We have an overcrowding issue because of some of the policies we've had in place and because of some of the decisions they've made to force an overcrowding issue to try to get more money for Department of Corrections. And if we look at this logically, as good stewards of the taxpayers' money, if we could unwind some of these decisions and take it back, we would still have an issue, but it wouldn't be as large of a problem as we've had. We took a mess and made it worse.
Running low on time. Can we skip you on this one, Senator? I'll let you have the last topic here. I didn't get into the gaming compact. I didn't get into COLA or something. But I want to end on
All the fun stuff.
I know all the fun. And I'll give you the fun stuff here as we leave the show here. The museum. A lot of them, Lieutenant Governor Justin Fortney with City of Guthrie have kind of gotten behind it. You guys as well getting behind that. Just briefly talk about the steps we're at right now.
Yeah, so we're all behind that. I remember this little obscure Facebook post that came out from Lieutenant Governor that said, hey, museum closed down in Washington, and wouldn't it be great at the First Capitol building in downtown Guthrie? I was the first post there that said, all in, 100% behind it, let's go. And it went crazy after that. So where we're at, I just was with the Lieutenant Governor last night at an event in Tulsa. And we talked about this very thing. So Justin has been great. He has been spending a lot of time creating documentation and information about the building, about Guthrie, about the tourism rates here, in Guthrie, and really building up Guthrie. The Lieutenant Governor then will take that information and he will put on his letterhead under his signature that information and send it to the board members of the museum who are looking to what they might do with with everything that's currently inside there that nobody's getting to see. The next step then is to start talking to these board members individually. I think you'll see telephone calls that will come from Guthrie, from Justin will play a big role in that. The Lieutenant Governor will play a big role in that. I hope that we're called in at some point. Get them to come down here and see the facility and see the enthusiasm that's behind this, or we make the trip to see them and really pitch this. I think all of us are behind that 100%. This can be an amazing thing for this community, truly.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how, like you said, a little offhanded comment on Facebook turns into a real opportunity, and that's the kind of thing that Lieutenant Governor Mappinell is just doing all the time. His energy and enthusiasm for tourism and commerce in the state is infectious. It's nice to see somebody in politics with a really positive outlook. I spend all the time talking about problems, and it's nice to pull up his Twitter feed and go, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in Oklahoma that's to focus on.
Yeah. I got to give a shout out though to Guthrie. One of the reasons that Lieutenant Governor has Guthrie on his mind is very early on. Guthrie sent an invitation for him to come in, and they laid out their wares in front of the Lieutenant Governor. You were there. All of us were there. And we just, we basically said, here's what Guthrie has to offer, and in your travels and in your discussions, please don't forget about us. And guess what? He didn't. Yeah. He did not forget about us, and when this opportunity came on, Guthrie was on his mind. And so those civic leaders, those community leaders, councilman, city manager, mayor, all those people drove that day. And because they did, Guthrie was on the mind of the Lieutenant Governor and continues to be.
I like his energy. He's very approachable, whether in person or on social media, very engaging. So,
Good guy.
great guy. Appreciate you guys stopping by.
Thank you.
Best of luck this session. It's starting up soon for you guys, your part-time job, right? Wink, wink. End on laughter there. But Representative Mize, Representative Pfeiffer, Senator Hall, appreciate you guys stopping by.
Thank you, Chris.
Best of luck this session, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you very much.
That's been the Roundup. So long.